Joining me is someone who's written plenty about the NDIS, former Productivity Commissioner and academic Judith Sloan, who's now a columnist also with the Australian newspaper. Judith, always great to talk to you. Why is the NDIS costing so very much?
Well, yes, I listened to Bill Shorten and, he had a long list, and I'm wondering whether he's really getting to the core of the problem. But I mean, there are a number of reasons why it's way over budget and also way over the numbers that they expected to be enrolled, is that you've basically got an open-ended program with generous entitlements. And so there's a tremendous incentive to get through that gate and take advantage of it. I mean, I think the irony of this is that, in fact, the Coalition did try to do some things, including independent assessment and also benchmarking. So what happens at the moment, the two people with basically the same disabilities receive very different budgets. Now, if we could actually get to a point where basically people who have similar disabilities are on the same budget, I think there could be some very substantial savings. But as you say, the providers have made hay. And what's happened also is that for people who are outside the scheme, the costs of those kinds of services, so maybe you've got a kid who needs some occupational therapy, but not on the NDIS, the costs of those services have absolutely skyrocketed. The final point he makes, which is probably true, is that there's just an enormous amount of cost shifting by the states. So instead of, autism and developmental delay being held within, say, the education budgets of the states, they've just basically thrown everything into the NDIS bucket. And the way the cost-sharing arrangements were finalised in the first instance meant that all the upside is funded by the Commonwealth, and the states themselves only fund a fixed share.
It's incredible, and some of it, I must say, rorting. There is definitely rorting. Carers going on cruises with the people they're caring for. They say, "Oh, we need the respite." It's just, and we're paying for that. But also some of it's well-intentioned. Doctors saying that children have worse autism than they really do in order to get them the support that they would need on the NDIS. But all in all, it's getting unsustainable. But the other thing that disturbed me today, Judith, is this. And I know you've been right on top of this issue as well. It's worried me for years. Labor has cranked up our immigration intake now to record levels to give, I think, its budget a sugar hit. More than 400,000 immigrants net just last year alone, more than 650,000 to come over the next 2 years. The Reserve Bank has just released, sort of notes to explain its decision on the interest rates. The last one has now said that is actually going to make inflation worse. It's going to make the housing shortage worse. And that's on top of what we already know, that our cities are being crowded out. What is the excuse for immigration levels so extremely high? Who is this helping?
Well, I think you make a number of good points here. And I mean, it's interesting that if you look at what I'd call the big Australian advocates, they would normally say, oh no, immigration is a good thing because it adds to supply, but it also adds to demand. So they always conceded that point. But at this point in time, we don't need any additions to demand. What the Reserve Bank is trying to do by pushing up the cash rate is actually to put a brake on demand. So what they're basically saying, I mean, I'm not sure you have to have done an economics degree to realise that this is not a good idea. But, Claire O'Neill, who is the overseeing minister, keeps on saying, the immigration program was in tatters. But all she seems to have done is, for example, clear a backlog. Well, that's great because that just means more immigrants coming here more rapidly and basically making it easier to come. So there's a lot of discussion, for example, with Indians who come initially enrolled in university where they quite easily get a visa and they arrive here the next week and cancel that enrolment and enrol in a cheap, possibly non-existent vocational course. And of course, at this point in time, they have full working rights, right? So there's no limits on the working rights of international students that existed once upon a time. In the past, you know, they could only work 20 hours a week during the semester time. So, I mean, we've put a lot of sugar on the table, Andrew, and it's exactly what you'd expect to happen.
Going back to the naivety of Australians, a government puts a big pot of honey in the middle of the road. Big surprise! Lots of bees coming to feed on it. Seriously. Judith Sloan, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.